That doesn't make sense.
Sarah's fingers traced the edge of the photograph, a yellowed testament to a moment in time no one had ever mentioned. The partially visible stranger standing beside her grandfather drew her attention. His face cut from the frame but not completely erased, as if someone had made a hasty attempt to remove him from family history. The cardboard backing felt worn beneath her fingertips, edges frayed from what must have been years of handling before being hidden away. She had found it 3 days after her mother's funeral, while sorting through the personal items her father couldn't bear to touch. The bedroom had remained untouched, her mother's reading glasses still perched on the nightstand beside a half-finished novel. Sarah had been methodically emptying drawers when she discovered a small wooden box tucked beneath her mother's lingerie, the kind of hiding place chosen by someone who never expected anyone else to look there. The photograph wasn't like the others displayed throughout the house, those carefully framed images of her grandfather in his dress uniform, medals gleaming against dark wool. This one showed him younger, leaner, his expression more guarded than the confident smile she knew from family albums. The insignia on his uniform stood out immediately, unfamiliar patches that whispered of clandestine operations, markings from a military branch entirely different from the one he'd proudly claimed throughout her childhood. Sarah whispered to herself, holding the photograph closer to the window light. The stranger beside her grandfather bore a striking resemblance to him. Similar jawline, same height, identical posture. They stood like brothers, except her grandfather had always maintained he was an only child. The background revealed a military celebration, a banner visible with a date that contradicted every story she'd ever heard about her grandfather's service. More disturbing was where she'd found it, tucked inside a diary with dates from before her birth, its pages filled with her mother's elegant handwriting, stopping abruptly 3 months before the photograph's timestamp. The diary itself had been wrapped in silk and placed beneath a false bottom of the wooden box, suggesting deliberate concealment rather than casual storage. Sarah sat on the edge of her mother's bed, photograph in one hand, diary in the other. Her mother had been the family record keeper, meticulously preserving their history in leather-bound albums. Yet this image had been deliberately excluded from that carefully curated collection, hidden away where no curious eyes would find it. A chill ran through her as she examined the unfamiliar insignia again. Every family story placed her grandfather in the Pacific during this period, so why did this photograph suggest otherwise? Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. Her father would know. He had to.
Dad? I found something while going through Mom's things. It's a photograph of Grandpa, but there's someone with him I don't recognize. And his uniform looks different than...
The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long before her father cleared his throat.
Where did you find it?
His voice sounded strange, tight with an emotion she couldn't identify.
In a box under Mom's things inside an old diary?
Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to nearly a whisper.
Sarah, listen to me carefully. That photograph, you need to destroy it right now.
Destroy it? Why would I...
It's nothing, just an old mistake. Your grandfather would have wanted it gone.
Dad, who's the man standing next to...
I said destroy it. Burn it, Sarah, please, for the family.
The call ended abruptly, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in confusion. Her father's reaction had done nothing but deepen her suspicion. Whatever this photograph contained, it wasn't nothing. Nothing didn't inspire that kind of fear. She turned the photograph over, noticing for the first time faint markings on the back. A date, December 17th, 1944, and what appeared to be coordinates, written in faded blue ink that didn't match her grandfather's distinctive handwriting. The coordinates pointed to somewhere in Europe, creating another glaring inconsistency with family stories that placed him in the Pacific during that time. Sarah returned to her apartment that evening, the photograph burning a hole in her purse. She hadn't destroyed it as her father demanded. Instead, she placed it carefully on her desk under the soft pool of lamplight, studying the details with growing unease. Everything about it contradicted the narrative she'd grown up with. The distinguished military career, the battlefield commendations, the origin story of their family's wealth and social standing. The man her grandfather appeared to be in this photograph wasn't the same one who beamed from portraits in the family home. This man seemed watchful, almost furtive, standing slightly apart from the celebration happening around him, and the stranger beside him, the one somebody had tried to cut from the frame, looked somehow more at ease, more authentic in the setting. The The stranger's face in that photograph, the one someone had tried to erase, wouldn't leave Sarah's thoughts. As she drove to her parents' home, she wondered how many other pieces of her family history had been carefully edited, cropped, and reframed to present a more palatable version of the truth. Her father's panicked demand to destroy the evidence only confirmed what her instincts were screaming. The story of who they were had been written in someone else's blood. Sarah's stomach knotted as she approached the familiar porch, the weight of childhood memories pressed against her chest, summer evenings reading on that swing, her grandfather's laugh echoing through open windows. She slipped inside using the key hidden in her mother's garden gnome, feeling like an intruder in her own past. Her father's study had always been off-limits, a rule that existed before it was even spoken. The heavy oak desk dominated the room, its surface meticulously organized. Sarah tried the top drawer, locked. Her fingers traced the family skeleton key her mother had given her on her 16th birthday, remembering her words, "For when you're ready to unlock our history." The key slid into the lock with unsettling ease. Inside lay a manila folder with her grandfather's name typed neatly at the top. The birth date below it contradicted the one celebrated at every family gathering. Even the birthplace, a small town in Eastern Europe, erased the American heartland origin story she'd heard throughout her life. Sarah's breath caught as the foundation of her identity began to crumble. Military records revealed her grandfather, the decorated war hero, had received the Silver Star for valor during the Battle of the Bulge. Sarah froze, her grandmother's quiet voice echoing from the past. "Your grandfather couldn't speak of that December. He wasn't there, you see. Not where they said he was." The contradiction felt damning now, no longer an old woman's confusion. At the back of the drawer, yellowed envelopes addressed to someone with her grandfather's last name, but a different first name, Joseph, not James, sent her heart racing. Each envelope carried postmarks from the European village whose coordinates matched those written on the photograph. Sarah connected these fragments. After World War II, many fled Europe with new identities, but changing your name to escape the past differed from stealing another person's life entirely. A leather-bound ledger revealed her family's wealth appeared suddenly in 1946, coinciding with her grandfather's arrival in America. No clear origin explained the substantial funds that had financed generations of privilege, her father's Ivy League education, their summer homes, the foundation bearing their name. Family stories had attributed their prosperity to business acumen and fortunate investments, explanations that now rang hollow. Newspaper clippings documented her grandfather's business rise alongside his partner Anton Weiss, until Weiss vanished from the narrative. A small obituary noting his unexpected passing aligned precisely with her grandfather's first major business acquisition. No cause of death appeared, no surviving family mentioned. Sarah arranged these puzzle pieces, her hands trembling. The legacy she'd inherited, the family name that commanded respect, suddenly felt tarnished, built on something dark rather than honorable. A text message from her Aunt Eleanor interrupted her thoughts. Minutes later, Sarah found her waiting at a cafe, tension evident in her rigid posture.
Your father called me. He's worried about your research. Some things are better left buried, Sarah. Your mother understood that.
Did she? Or was she just another person forced to protect this family's secrets?
Eleanor's shoulders sagged.
The past is complicated. People made choices during impossible times. You can't judge those decisions from the safety of hindsight.
What about justice? What about truth?
What about protecting the family name? Your grandparents built something from nothing. Whatever happened before...
Before what?
Leave it alone. Some ghosts should stay buried. Your mother knew that.
Her mother. The thought struck Sarah like lightning. In her childhood bedroom beneath a loose floorboard under the window seat, Sarah found a small wooden box, her mother's secret cache. Inside lay unfamiliar identification papers, a small silver key, and a gold wedding band with an inscription in a foreign language, dated years before her grandparents' official anniversary. The physical evidence trembled in her hands as Sarah confronted the truth. The foundation of her identity, the stories that shaped her understanding of who she was, were fabrications. Her beloved grandfather, whose gentle wisdom had guided her childhood, whose integrity had been her moral compass, might have been living someone else's life. The coordinates led Sarah across the ocean to a village that time seemed to forget, where weathered faces lit with recognition at the photograph she carried, but not for the reasons she expected. In war, they say, the first casualty is truth. But what if the second casualty was her grandfather's very identity? Standing before the village's modest stone memorial, Sarah's fingers trembled as they traced the engraved names of the fallen. There, etched permanently in granite, was the same name inscribed inside the wedding band she'd discovered, a name that had no place in her family's carefully curated history. "We keep meticulous records here," explained Madame Rousseau, the village's elderly historian, her accent thick but her English precise. "During occupation, documentation became our form of resistance, our way of ensuring that truth survived even when people did not." Sarah nodded, her throat tight with unspoken questions. The small museum housed in what had once been the village school contained shelves of carefully preserved ledgers, photographs, and handwritten testimonies. Unlike the sterile military archive Sarah had consulted, these records vibrated with human experience, the fragmented, messy reality of war preserved by those who had lived through it. "These two young men," Madame Rousseau said, carefully sliding a brittle photograph across the table, "were inseparable." The distant toll of the church bell punctuated her words. Both from respected families, both joined the resistance together. Her weathered finger pointed to two soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, smiling with the invincibility of youth. "This one died saving 23 villagers when the Germans discovered our hidden shelter. A hero." Sarah's breath caught. The hero was unmistakably the stranger from her family photograph, the man someone had tried to erase.
And the other?
"Disappeared during the same operation," Madame Rousseau replied, a shadow crossing her face. The official report listed him as missing in action, presumed dead. But there were rumors. The local archives revealed a complexity that sterile military documents could never capture. During wartime, especially in small villages like ours, we relied on each other to keep our stories alive. The official records, they tell only part of the truth. In a dusty filing cabinet, Sarah discovered testimonies describing the night of the shelter raid. One account detailed a soldier who had disappeared hours before the Germans arrived, taking vital information with him. The description matched what she feared. Her grandfather may have betrayed his comrades. It was not uncommon, Madame Rousseau explained when Sarah carefully approached the subject, for soldiers to assume identities of fallen comrades during such chaotic times. Some did it to escape their past, others to claim honors or benefits. The pieces shifted in Sarah's mind as wind whispered through the half-open window. Could her grandfather have betrayed his unit and then stolen his dead friend's identity? It would explain the contradictions in the military archives, which impossibly placed her grandfather in two locations during key battles.
The medal citations. They're for actions in battles where
your grandfather could not have been, Madame Rousseau finished, her eyes showing understanding rather than judgment. But his friend was there. The records are quite clear. In the community archive, Sarah found additional photographs of resistance fighters. In one striking image, the stranger, the true hero, stood proudly among his comrades. Beside him was a man whose features resembled her grandfather, though with subtle differences that family legend had smoothed away over decades. Many survivors faced moral dilemmas after what they witnessed, Madame Rousseau said. Some carried shame throughout their lives for actions taken during impossible circumstances. War makes monsters of good men and heroes of cowards, sometimes in the same day. Sarah hesitated before retrieving her family photograph. Placing it on the table, she watched Madame Rousseau's expression transform from professional interest to shock.
"This is impossible, these two men together after what happened."
Her voice trailed off as her eyes filled with complex emotions.
"What do you mean?"
"This photograph cannot be real. One man betrayed the other. They would never have stood together like this after that night, unless
Unless it was taken before the betrayal.
As the museum lights dimmed with the setting sun, Sarah finally understood. The stranger wasn't a stranger at all. He was her grandfather's best friend, the true war hero whose identity her grandfather had claimed after betraying him. The photograph captured their brotherhood before that fatal decision, preserved perhaps as evidence, perhaps as penance. Truth may set you free, but first it shatters everything you thought you knew. Sarah's hand trembled on her father's doorknob, the damning evidence tucked in her bag. How many nights had he sat alone in this study, guardian of a secret that poisoned their family tree from its roots? Tonight, the carefully maintained facade would finally crack open. The heavy wooden door creaked as Sarah entered. Her father sat behind his desk, his silhouette barely visible in the dim lamplight. Without a word, she placed the photograph and wedding band on the polished mahogany surface between them. The physical evidence lay exposed, impossible to dismiss.
You went to the village.
Not a question, but a resignation, as if he'd been waiting for this moment for decades.
I met Madame Rousseau. I know what grandfather did.
A heavy silence filled the room. Her father reached for the photograph, his fingers hovering above it, trembling slightly.
He wasn't a hero, was he? He stole a dead man's identity, his best friend's identity.
Her father's shoulders sagged visibly.
It's more complicated than that.
Then explain it to me. Explain how my grandfather betrayed his unit, how a man I've honored my entire life built everything we have on a lie.
Her father's knuckles whitened as he gripped the desk. During the chaos, her grandfather had panicked. In fear, he'd exposed the secondary escape route while trying to save himself. His friend, the man whose identity he would later steal, stayed behind to hold off the Germans, sacrificing himself so others could escape.
He couldn't face what he'd done. When he found his friend's body days later, the identification papers were partially burned, the face unrecognizable. The opportunity was there, and he took it.
He stole a hero's identity to escape his own cowardice.
At first, yes, but living someone else's life became a prison. Every medal was another link in the chain of his guilt.
When did you find out?
His eyes darted away.
I was 28, found similar evidence. When I confronted him, he broke down completely.
Sarah stepped closer.
And you became complicit.
The accusation hung in the air. Her father's composure cracked.
I made a choice to protect my family. The guilt was destroying him.
What about the families who never got closure?
Her father winced.
Your mother argued the same thing. She wanted to make restitution. I convinced her that some secrets should die with their keepers.
Sarah paced the study, each footstep echoing.
This isn't protection, this is imprisonment. We've all been living in a cage built from his betrayal.
Your grandfather wasn't a monster. After taking his friend's identity, he spent decades trying to honor it, donating to causes, helping war-affected families.
While living in a mansion bought with stolen valor.
A tense silence settled between them.
Did you silence people who asked too many questions?
Her father's silence was answer enough.
3 generations, 1 moment of betrayal, and 3 generations bound by lies.
Something shifted in her father's eyes, a surrender.
When I found out, I had a choice. When your mother learned the truth, she faced the same dilemma. Now it's your turn, Sarah. What will you do with this burden?
As her father's composure finally shattered, Sarah witnessed something profound. Her father's entire sense of self collapsing.
I believed I was sparing you, but I was passing down our true inheritance. Not wealth, but moral injury that compounds with each generation. Your mother understood that better than I did.
Sarah felt her anger giving way to something more complex. Not forgiveness, but understanding of the psychological prison her family had constructed, where every achievement came with the silent tax of deception.
Why do 90% of mystery fans crave suspenseful twists? Let's find out. And that's it for today's story. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. If you love suspense, mystery, and intriguing stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. And hey, the journey doesn't end here. Click on the next video right here to dive into another thrilling story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.